One more thing to wrap up our discussion on condos and townhomes. Again, if we look in North Carolina Real Estate Commission's homepage and publications, y'all write that down. Publications. This is the most. Oh, you guys there? There. Okay. All right. I guess these weekend malls. Publications to me is the most useful resource, especially to help us communicate. And once again, if we look under these Q&A brochures, they do have a Q&A brochure on condos and townhomes. As we noted here, you can either get the PDF that you can include in your transactional e-file. You can also order the nice glossy brochure. So however you want to, but no shame in the free download. I have no problem with sending a free PDF, especially if we have, sharing documents, emailing documents. A lot of these Q&A brochures, and we're going to go through this one as a sample, but most of these Q&A brochures, remember, these are written to help educate the public, educate the consumer. So as we go through this, you may see that it's, kind of directed towards the buyer and or seller. But again, these are tools that we can use to help us have conversations with them. As we've mentioned, I'm a big fan of why recreate the wheel when you have this information here. So this kind of breaks down the differences, and it also directs us to the Q&A. There's a Q&A brochure on subdivisions and planned communities. So again, if you're working with buyers or sellers in these certain areas, certain types of homes, and you can help them. So purchasing a condo or townhome, what's the difference? Well, we said earlier, the big difference is the condo owners own inside, townhome owners own everything, air and land. And I do think that's the biggest distinction between the two. Like I said to you guys, you can't rely on the name. Don't look at the name of the subdivision. They could call it, pick something. They could call it Lovely Condominium Complex. But if it doesn't meet this definition, then we can't sell it as a condo. You guys with me? We have to look at the actual unit and how it's sold, not what it's called. There are also some communities that have both condos and townhomes in them. So it's the unit that we're selling, not the subdivision, not the community. So we talk about the big difference. This also does talk about the common areas, recreation areas, sidewalks, parking lots, etc. Can we see that? There we go. Common areas and townhomes are owned by the HOA. Condo owners share ownership of the common areas. So I would say those are the two big differences in condos and townhomes. Ownership, if you own land or not, and how or who, I should say, owns the common areas. Are there legal differences between the condos and the townhomes? Again, that's where we talk about the North Carolina Condominium Act of 1986. Most townhomes aren't regulated, except those that might be covered by the Planned Community Act. Anything that falls outside of the Planned Community Act would be governed by the same laws as single-family homes. So I think as far as ownership goes, townhomes are more similar to single-family homes. If you own a single-family home, you own airspace, you own land, subsurface rights, etc. How will I know if there's restrictions and what those restrictions are? Safe to say there are going to be restrictions, some kind of covenants, private restrictions for covenants, possibly some bylaws, articles of incorporation, etc. Will the closing attorney or the broker furnish me a copy of these covenants and bylaws? Not necessarily. The closing attorney doesn't have an obligation to do that. If the real estate broker is assisting you, the broker may be able to obtain a copy of these documents. I think, because I saw some heads bobs when I said this earlier, typically HOAs only like to deal with the owners. So they're not going to want to talk to me and you. They're not going to want to talk to somebody that's considering buying or their agent. So again, this is where we need the seller to help us. We need the seller to assist us. We might be able to find it online. I've only had one. I was blown away. The very first condo that I ever listed, condo or townhome that I ever listed, I think it was a condo. And my seller hadn't lived there in like 20 years. She'd been renting the unit out for, all that time. So the tenant was in place. And when I was having the conversation with the seller about getting the HOA information, she said, I wouldn't know how to do that. And she said, here's the number I have. You want to call? And I was like, yeah, I'll call. I'll see what they say. Dude was like, man, what you need? I'll drop it off by your office. And I'm like, well, you can email it to, no, I'll drop it off. So he met me at my office, sat down with me at the conference table, went over everything with me. I was like, wow, only if all HOAs were like this. And I quickly learned that they weren't. So I definitely think that was the exception to the norm there. But again, just have your seller get involved to help get that information if they don't already have it. Any special protections for condo purchasers? Well, maybe. If you're considering a new unit, then you have to be provided with that public offering statement. And then you also have that 7-day recession period. And that's all thanks to the Condominium Act of 1986. And then we explained that if you are purchasing, a resale, then you're not going to have that rescission. You're not going to have that public offering, but you should have a resale certificate to inform the purchaser about the developer, the ownership, that kind of thing. Buying a home that is still under a condo or townhome, there we go, that is still under construction. Do they have to finish the development? No, they don't have to finish before they can sell the first unit. The only thing they need to do before they can close on the sale of the very first unit is have all those covenants and bylaws recorded. They got to be finalized and on record. There can be no preliminary to have that first sale. Does the developer have to provide promised amenities? Yes, anything promised must be built, need be built. So again, the developer, what this new Condominium Act of 1986 does is it holds the developer to the buyer, purchase or potential buyers. Owning, who's responsible for maintaining? The owners are responsible for the inside of the units. The homeowners association is going to be responsible for the exterior. So again, typically this is where we see a special assessment for new roofs, for example. What is a homeowners association? The development manages and maintains the common areas. How may dues be increased? Typically a vote. May it be the homeowners' votes. As costs go up, unfortunately, so do HOA dues. Another rare example that I found in my town or my condo, my HOA dues cover the water, public water. So I don't have public water on my bill. It's covered by the HOA dues. Now what's happening, again, you guys, these are older buildings, like mid-70s they were built. And what they discovered is people aren't fixing leaks inside because it's not affecting them. So if there's a leaky toilet or something, for example, they're having a hard time. They're constantly telling homeowners to get those leaks fixed. So I wouldn't be surprised if one day there's a vote to remove public water from the HOA and let the individual owners pay for their own water. I don't know how that would work, but that's surprising to me. I think that's something that's pretty unique as well. Can the owner avoid paying assessments? No. Once the assessment's been voted, then the owner is responsible for them. That's just part of the understanding of buying into a community like this, is you understand that periodically there will be special assessments for repairs and updates. Can the owner association tell me what I can and cannot do? Well, to some degree. Again, there's covenants, there's bylaws and how you can use the property, the common areas. My condo complex has a pool, and I swear every year the list of rules grows. You can't do this, you can't do that. You know, this year we can't have music too loud. I'm like, oh, for goodness sakes, we can't have any fun by the pool anymore. Because each year that list just grows. But I guess you have an issue, and an issue creates new rules. If you have a dispute about the rules, you may have to take it in court. Remember, covenants are private land use controls. So we talked about in pre-licensing, we talked about public land use controls and private land use controls. Public land use controls are your zoning. And any violations of zoning, for example, you can call the police, right? If your neighbor's not using their property according to zoning, then you can call the police. With an HOA being a private, then you need to handle the matters internally. So if you can't handle it with the HOA, then you may need to take them to court to address it. What happens if you don't abide? Well, here we go. They may seek relief in court. If you don't pay your HOA dues, they could put a lien on you. They could put a lien on the property until those dues are collected. Signing up for one of these means you're signing up to pay those dues and special assessments as they come up. This is addressing a property management company managing the HOA. I think you're going to see one or two things. Either going to have the property management company managing the HOA, or you're going to have the individual homeowners manage the HOA. So they all kind of take turns voting. You know, one year you get to be president, you get to be vice president, treasurer, secretary, and they all take turns with those roles. And then, of course, enforcement, again, is private. So enforcement on the covenants and the bylaws would be handled straight through the HOA. And if you're not getting those matters resolved, it might be that court is where you have to go, your option there. What questions do we have on condos and townhomes? I liked not having to deal with a yard. You know, I just paid my bill and somebody came and mowed for me. And now I have a yard to deal with. And, you know, I like being outside, but not working outside. I want to play in the garden. That's what I want to do. But I wasn't able to have a garden in a condo. So, you know, there's pluses and minuses here. All right. Remember, this topic is kind of specialized properties, not specific to North Carolina, but things that we may see in North Carolina. So the next little topic that we have here is on timeshares. Anybody, let's see, you'd almost have to be at the beach or the mountains to have experience in a timeshare. Anybody own a timeshare? I'm just curious. No, anybody have any experience?
No, but my dad does.
Okay.
And so
Is
like
he in North Carolina?
He's not in North Carolina. He's actually in Florida. So he's had his timeshare for, gosh, probably 17 years. My dad,
Wow.
He's probably one of the unique ones. He utilizes the living crap out of it.
Is he able to like his week transfer it to other places so he can
Yeah.
go?
So like my honeymoon, we transferred it so we could get a week in Colorado.
Nice.
We go to the Keys as a family, you know, every year and use the timeshare. So
Nice. See, I think that's not all timeshares will allow you to do that, will they? Some will say, this is your unit, this is where you come every year. I think that's definitely a nice perk. I have like you, I have a buddy whose parents have a timeshare in Myrtle Beach. And I know one year, a couple years ago, he took that week and went to Scotland. And I was like, nice, you know, what a great opportunity to travel and explore. Overall, I mean, your dad's been in it for 17 years. So overall, he sees the benefit of it. I mean, I know there's the horror stories of timeshares, but let's hear a good, something positive about timeshares.
Did you ask something?
Yeah, what's his overall experience? I mean, like I said, you just
he
hear the
loves
horrors, like
it.
you're in it, you're trapped and you can't get out. But I mean, for 17
He
years, he
never
obviously,
he never complains about it. He actually loves it. He has told me that lucky me, I get to inherit it. Like he's definitely in it, but he just enjoys it. He's been able to move around, go to different places, explore different areas. And so I've heard horror stories, but fortunately for us, it's been very positive.
so far so good. And I think, I mean, not to, concern you or anything, but I think the stories come up when you try to sell your unit, when you try to separate yourself from it. And that here, I mean, you said, you hit the nail on the head when you said you get to inherit it. So it's to my understanding that a lot of the times death isn't an out, it keeps going. So congratulations to you. One day you'll get to deal with it. That was something, again, I had a friend found out that her in-laws owned one, fine and dandy. The problem is that her and her husband were getting, she said, I don't want a timeshare. And I said, well, evidently they signed something saying that you were going to get it. So North Carolina specifically, I can't speak for all states, obviously, but North Carolina specifically has undergone some changes, undergone some rules with timeshares, because there tends to be a reputation of the used car salesman, the hard sale, the pushy salesman. When you go to a timeshare, do you have to go to the spiel every week and try to get the upgrade? You don't even have to do that. See, that's nice. That's nice. A lot of them will say every week you come, you got to, come into the office and sit down and watch the video for, 15 minutes. They're always trying to upsell you. So that's good to know. But I think that's part of the reason why North Carolina has put, you can see here, there's license law and commission rules on how timeshares are handled and regulated. The Timeshare Act, which we'll talk about in just a second, applies to any timeshare owned within North Carolina. And once again, the way this is designed, if it fits the definition of a timeshare, then it's going to be treated like a timeshare. So it doesn't matter what you call it. You could call it, ocean resort, but if it fits the definition of a timeshare, then we have to treat it as a timeshare. And they are highly regulated under the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, again, just to protect the public, to protect the consumer. What do you guys remember about timeshares from pre-licensing? Anything at all? There we go. She's gonna do it for us. I see she's gonna, you get the 5, 5, 5, 10, then your jazz hands. So that's really and we're going to talk about what that means, 5, 5, 5, 10, but that's kind of the big thing to know about timeshares for us. Obviously, if you ever get involved in timeshare brokerage activities, you got more training coming, you have more laws and rules to learn. And as we mentioned yesterday, the new rules going into effect this July 1st, most of the new rules this year revolve around timeshares. So again, if you're getting involved in this, just make sure that you're current. So the basic definition of a timeshare, it's a right to occupy a unit during 5 or more separate time periods over at least 5 years. So again, this is our 5, 5. We'll break that down as we go. 5 or more separate time periods over at least 5 years, 5 being the minimum. So as long as you sign up for anything, don't care what it's called, as long as you sign up for anything and you're committed to go there 5 times over a period of at least 5 years in North Carolina, it's treated as a timeshare. It follows the Timeshare Act. Some basic definitions of timeshares to help us better understand this, break this down. The timeshare developer is the person or the entity that creates the timeshare, develops the timeshare. They purchase for the purpose of resale, reselling the individual units. And that is their business. They are in the business of selling timeshare units. Similar to condos and townhomes, or similar to condos, I should even say, they're selling the unit. There's still the common areas. There's still the other areas that members of that townhome. So the week that you are there, you're allowed to enjoy the other common areas. My aunt and uncle have a timeshare in Massanutten, Virginia. I just like saying that, Massanutten. And I thought they were kidding when they first told me that, but it's a real place. You can look it up. And they have pool and water slides, and there's a rec center with like an arcade and ping pong or paddleboard courts. And I mean, it's, you know, a little miniature golf. I mean, we went with them one year, and you can spend the whole week there just playing in the various places. So definitely common areas, I would say, is a big draw for timeshares. The idea of once you're here, you can stay. You don't see the need to go out and explore Massanutten, for example. So that's nice that they keep you there. So the developer creates it. And again, the timeshare is for the purpose of selling timeshares. And understand, basically what you're buying is the right to occupy for certain periods of time. So even though you may be at the same unit year after year after year, you bought the right to occupy that unit. You basically own that unit with 51 other people. Okay. The project broker, each timeshare development must have a project broker. And the project broker is the person, they're licensed, they have an active real estate license. And they're the ones that are responsible for the day-to-day operations of the timeshare. They're going to be responsible for the timeshares salespersons. We'll talk about them in just a second. The activities of the developer, just the day-to-day action. I think if I were you, I tend to think of the project broker, think of them as like the designated broker in charge. Each development needs a project broker. The project broker is ultimately responsible for that development. Another word to know is our timeshare instrument. The timeshare instrument, an instrument is just a document. So the timeshare instrument is the document that transfers the timeshare to whomever's purchasing it. Again, you're buying a week. You're buying a one unit for a week, typically. Whether or not you're a legal owner or a beneficial owner, the legal owner is the one that holds the title under their name. The beneficial owner is the one that's going to enjoy the benefits later, possibly, like in Sabrina's case. I bet you she would be the beneficial owner. She didn't benefit from it yet. So there's going to be this future, this inheritance idea with timeshares typically. The timeshare salesperson is the licensed agent that's actually selling the timeshare. They're engaging in brokerage activities. So they do need a North Carolina license to sell a timeshare located in North Carolina. They follow the same rules we do. They got to take CE. They got to renew between May 15th and June 30th. Remember, there are no different license categories. This is just timeshare salespeople are specializing in timeshare, whereas you and I might specialize in residential. They're still held to the exact same standards. The timeshare unit is the individual unit that we're referring to, the real property that is purchased. And what makes this unique is you're buying a unit but you only have the right to visit it once a week. And I think what we're learning more and more about is what's becoming more common is situations like Sabrina was saying, where they can take their week and go somewhere else, as long as, I guess it's all under the same umbrella. Are they all owned by the same? Okay, so as long as they're owned by the same corporation, then you can transfer that unit. How much notice do you have to give? Do you know? Like if you're gonna go
I
somewhere
think
else?
I think it depends on where he's going. So like for the keys, it's like a year. So he's got
Sure.
multiple. He's been playing this game for quite some time. So he's got multiple, and he's got like one area in the keys. He's got 2 units there.
Okay.
So yes, but now something like we went to Massanutten ourselves, and
Fun.
there's like nothing there unless you're in there. But
Exactly. The only thing in Massanutten is the town, right? Is
right.
the timeshare.
Depends on where you're going, depends on the lead time that you have to give. And if the week is available, it's about the weeks being available too.
Gotcha. I think you hit the nail on the head, Sabrina, when you said he's learned to play the game. I think that's, that takes experience. Like I said, 17 years of ownership. He's learned how to maneuver that. Now he's able to use that to his advantage and go to different, I think that's cool. Go to different places. To me, that would be a huge draw, to go here, here, and here, as long as you know how to play the game. So the timeshare unit.
I don't know if
Yeah.
people realize too, like for him, from my understanding, like he pays for that week. So a week may cost him $1,600, or a Massanutten, it may only cost him $400. So it varies.
So there's a difference. You probably pay more to go to Key West than you would to Massanutten.
Absolutely.
I got you. I got you. That makes sense then. That makes sense, because you pay the difference.
You're basically paying like taxes and fees, not so much for the condo itself. It's for the fees.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Thank you. I learned something today. Each timeshare development should have a timeshare registrar. The timeshare registrar it's a natural person, it's a real being, and they're the ones that does the recording. When a timeshare instrument, when a unit is sold, then that creates an instrument that needs to be recorded, the register of deeds. So that ownership needs to be on record. If there needs to be a lien filed, then the timeshare registrar is going to be the one to file the lien. So the registrar handles the registrations. Each timeshare development also has a project registration. Similar to our covenants with our condos and townhomes, this needs to be complete and on file before we can sell the first unit. So you can have preliminary while you're under contract, but you cannot sell, you cannot close on the first unit until that stuff is finalized and recorded. So the project registration has to be finalized and recorded before you close the first unit. And that just goes back to a buyer deserves to know what they're buying. Could you imagine if you were the first purchaser of maybe a timeshare unit and you close and it's yours, you're locked in, you're committed, and they say, we're going to change the bylaws. Could you imagine? They can't do that. That's why they have to have all this finalized and ready to go. Again, they can have preliminary while you're under contract, but it's got to be finalized. And if they change anything when you're under contract, then the purchaser should have the right to decide if they want to move forward with that or not. They should give them an out if they choose to exercise that. If the developer doesn't register the timeshare project, with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, in other words, if the commission doesn't know about it, for the developer, this could be a Class 1 felony. So all timeshare developments are registered with the commission. They provide that public offering statement, that certificate of registration. And that way the commission, not only is the public aware what's going on, but the commission knows to follow this development. They know to to make sure it's like registering a firm, basically. You're just registering the timeshare development. Developer's obligation to record. Once a new instrument is a new document, then they need to record 6 days, less than 6 days or no more than 45. Once we go under contract. Because the other, let me think, 5.5, we did 5.5. We'll break this all down in a second. The third 5, the buyer in a timeshare has a 5-day recession period. So back to our basic definition, the timeshare is defined, you own at least five separate time periods over at least 5 years. Your buyer has a 5-day right to rescind. Again, there's been concern in the past about timeshare salespeople being pushy, about some of these timeshare units not being clear in what they're selling. So part of what we're doing with allowing this 5-day recession period is having the purchaser feel comfortable, know what they're buying, have an opportunity to review the documents, and give them time to back out if need be. That's why we record it no less than 6 days. We want to make sure that they're committed, that they get past their 5-day recession period. But we need to get it within that window. Timeshare developers need to have an escrow account because they're holding deposits. If that buyer rescinds within 5 days, they're going to get their deposits back. So the escrow account holds the deposit for that period of time. Again, they were going to follow the same trust account rules that we do. There's no different there. Property management or sales if you're doing earnest money. Deposit within 3 days of receipt. And here's our 10. So you have to, the developer has to keep the deposit in the trust account for 10 days. So if the buyer rescinds within 5, they're to immediately get their deposit back once we verify that it's cleared the bank. And after it's been in the trust account for 10 days, the developer can transfer that from their trust account to their operating account and use that money however they use it for their operations. As we said earlier, anytime you have a deposit, you're holding a deposit, you always have the right to verify that it's cleared the bank, right? You want to make sure that it's clear before you refund that deposit. And that's why if the buyer canceled, the developer has 30 days to refund. They do have the right to make sure that that check's not going to bounce before they refund it. That's fair. That protects the developer. Sometimes those earnest money deposits and timeshare deposits, and sometimes those checks bounce. So you have the right to make sure that the fund's there. We mentioned the public offering statement, the developer's public offering statement. Again, it needs to be provided prior to contract formation. The development's final copy is recorded before the first unit is sold. But the buyer, when they're deciding to purchase, should be provided the information prior to contract formation. So they have that to take into consideration. Things that we typically see in the public offering statement, the financing obligations, who owns the property? Is it shareholders, for example? Is it an LLC, corporation? How does that work? Any management agreements, what their responsibility is, how they're going to maintain the property, when it's available. I mean, that would be important, right? When it's available, what week of the year do you get? Because that is your week every year. And then the term of the timeshare, is it good for 10 years? Is it good indefinitely? Is it good for your next of kin's life? I mean, there's several different ways that can get broken down. And this is interesting to me. If the developer fails to provide the public offering statement prior to contract formation, then the purchaser is entitled to money. If the developer doesn't provide the information, then the purchaser can be entitled of up to 10% of the purchase price. So that's a pretty good incentive right there for the developer to provide. Don't just tell them to do it, hold them to it. As we said, the buyer has the right to cancel. They can cancel 5 days without penalty. What that means is they terminate their contract within 5 days, they will get all of their deposit back. The developer doesn't have the right to keep anything. The developer can't waive the buyer's right to cancel. That is part of the North Carolina Timeshare Act. So the developer can't say, no, we're not going to do that, or I'm only going to give you 3 days. That's not up to the developer. That's part of what's regulated by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Currently, the law says that the buyer cancels either by providing written notice hand delivered or mailed. That doesn't say email, does it? That says can be hand delivered or mailed. Now, I don't know if that'll ever get revised. I mean, we all know the old saying that the law can't keep up with technology. So I don't know if that's the case here, if maybe they consider email just not formal enough. But for right now, it still says hand delivered or mail. And again, if the purchaser exercises that right to cancel within 5 days, they get all of their deposits back. There's nothing that the developer is entitled to keep, and they cannot write their own rules on that. This is what it is. Since each timeshare development is registered with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, they too can regulate. Man, they can highly regulate. They can regulate the developer, the development, the project broker, the salespeople. They get involved with everything. And so their disciplinary authority, they can suspend or revoke license of anybody. They can reprimand. And what's unique about this is the only time that the Real Estate Commission will get involved with matters of money. You can only get fined by the Real Estate Commission if you're a timeshare developer. And the rules say that the commission can fine the developer up to $500 per violation. Again, just high regulations because of the reputation. Timeshares just have a reputation of being pushy. So the commission's gotten involved and helped protect the public, help protect the people. Penalties if the developer violates any of the commissions, or excuse me, the Timeshare Act, just the Timeshare Act in general. Violation of the act is a Class 1 misdemeanor. If you don't register the project, that's a Class 1 felony. If you don't record your instruments, that's a Class 1 felony. Quite heavily regulated. I don't know if that makes us feel any better about timeshares. I don't know if you guys are ready to run out right now and buy one, but hopefully knowing how regulated these are, we're trying to combat that bad reputation that they have in some cases. As far as the operations go, developer and salespeople are both responsible. How long do you think timeshare developers and salespeople have to keep their records for? If you were to guess, how long would you think? Yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah, 3 years. They follow the same rules that we do. So there are no separate general brokerage rules for the timeshare developer than there are for the rest of us. And they too have agency disclosures, agency agreements. They have an agency agreement. It's sales. So they would have their working with real estate agent disclosure. The consumer needs to know when they go to the timeshare office that the timeshare salespeople represent the timeshare developer. I say all that to say, it's my opinion, I think what you guys need to know about timeshares is 5, 5, 5, 10. 5, 5, 5, 10. 5 or more periods over 5 or more years. The buyer has a 5-day right of recession. Developer keeps deposits in their trust account for 10 days. And this is the only time, write that down, only time that the real estate commission gets involved with matters of money. They will not fine anybody but the timeshare developer. So let's look. Let's go back to our video library. And as you can imagine, again, if we look under consumers, we have a timeshare video. We watched more videos in this class. Oh, wait a minute. You know what I didn't do? Hang on. Let's try that again. Here.
Did you know that the Real Estate Commission registers and regulates timeshare projects? In a timeshare, ownership in a single living unit is shared by many people. So what makes a property a timeshare? Well, a timeshare is a right to occupy one or more units during 5 or more separate time periods over at least 5 years. A timeshare unit could be a house, a condominium, townhome, a cabin, a room in a resort, or something similar. Timeshares are sold to consumers in lots of different formats. Examples include a vacation license, prepaid hotel reservations, a club membership, a limited partnership, or a vacation bond. In recent years, timeshare developers have even been selling timeshares where the right to use it is awarded on the basis of points, vouchers, splits, dividends, or floating use. In some cases, purchasers may have to compete with each other in order to use the property. What makes someone a timeshare developer? Well, basically, a developer is a person or company that creates or accumulates timeshares for the purpose of selling them to others. A person who purchases a timeshare for his or her personal enjoyment is not considered a developer. A timeshare developer might not have a real estate license. However, anyone who sells timeshares in North Carolina must be a licensed broker. What role does the Real Estate Commission play? Well, all timeshare projects that are offering to sell timeshares must first be registered with the Commission. The timeshare registration is a public document. It contains information about the physical location of the timeshare development, the property and amenities, the developer, and key personnel for the project. A developer must submit a copy of the public offering statement to the Commission, which is also given to purchasers in each transaction. Public offering statement provides consumers with information about the purchaser's financial obligations, when the amenities will be available, the specific term of the timeshare, the purchaser's right to cancel, and other important details. Registration of a timeshare does not mean that the Commission approves the offering or that it is a good deal. All timeshare registrations expire on June 30th unless renewed prior to that date. Registrations must be renewed every year for as long as the project is actively selling timeshares. While the timeshare registration is active, the developer must submit to the Commission any changes to the registration or the public offering statement. All registered timeshares must have a project broker to keep the Commission up to date and ensure that project documents comply with the Timeshare Act and Commission rules. The project broker also must ensure that timeshare sales are conducted only by a licensed broker. What about timeshare developers in other states? The North Carolina Real Estate Commission has jurisdiction where all or part of the project is located in North Carolina. Timeshare projects located entirely in other states that intend to solicit or execute contracts within North Carolina must employ real estate brokers licensed in North Carolina, but don't need to register. While the Commission staff may not give legal advice, they are available to answer questions pertaining to timeshares. More information is also available on the Commission's website under Forms. If you have questions, contact the Commission's Regulatory Affairs Division at 919-875-3700 at extension 131, or send an email to regulatory-affairs@ncrec.gov.
Did you guys catch that one part? The Timeshare Act regulates a timeshare when any or part of it is located in North Carolina, but it also regulates salespeople when they're selling or executing contracts. In other words, if you're on North Carolina soil, you follow the North Carolina Timeshare Act. So the timeshare might be located in Florida or Massanutten, let's say, but if the salesperson is coming to North Carolina to make the sale, they have to follow that Timeshare Act. I always think that's interesting too. The forms he was mentioning, again, under your forms tab and timeshare registration, we're not going to go through these, isn't that the good news? But there is this whole laundry list of timeshare registration forms. If you ever do get into the timeshare development game, this is obviously where you're going to want to start. But this makes sure you're in compliance. Again, you're not just following license law and commission rule, but you're following the Timeshare Act as well. Comments on a timeshare? Anybody run out ready to buy one now? Did I? No, you guys are like, I hear you. It's either people either are on board or not. I mean, I like that you can transfer. You know, my resistance to timeshare was always the fact that I like to go different places on vacation. I don't want to go to the same place year after year after year. But now that you can transfer, I think that's, for the most part, and so I think that's a huge, huge perk. Questions?
I'm just trying to write down to make sure I clearly understand that last part that you just mentioned that was in the video. Now, I understood that the North Carolina Real Estate Commission oversees the soil. So if the timeshare is in the state of North Carolina, but then
In part or whole, yes.
part, well, any part of North Carolina.
Yep.
However, if the company is outside of North Carolina and they purchase the prop and they have their timeshare property in North Carolina and the agent is not in North Carolina, can you just say that one more time?
So if the property is outside of North Carolina, the developer and the property is outside of North Carolina, and they send a salesperson to North Carolina, because that salesperson is on North Carolina soil, they have to follow the North Carolina Timeshare Act.
So when would something like that happen? Like, were the developers trying to target North Carolina?
Prime example, timeshares in Myrtle Beach. Myrtle Beach is about this far away from North Carolina, right? So they may
Okay.
want to send salespeople from Myrtle Beach to go 20 minutes across the border to sell those timeshare units in Myrtle Beach. So once they cross into North Carolina soil, then they are to follow the North Carolina Timeshare Act. Salespersons in this state, da 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 da. That prevents, that's North Carolina's way of protecting their public.
Mhm,
That
mhm.
prevents shady salesmen from coming up from Florida. I hate to keep picking on Florida, but shady salesmen coming from other parts, other states, and trying to take advantage of our public, right? If the transaction's happening, if the documents are executed on North Carolina soil, that salesperson is licensed in North Carolina and they're following the North Carolina Timeshare Act.
Okay, so they have to be licensed in North Carolina
Yes,
as well.
yes,
Okay.
yes. Again, I think Myrtle Beach is just the best example.
I think so too. Yeah, I got
What
it.
is it, 20 minutes away from the border or something like that? And if there were no regulation protecting our people, it'd be so easy to just cross the border and do what you want to do. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Thank you.
Think-
Other questions or comments on timeshares? Let's see. Chassis says like for marketing, is that, I'm sorry, I missed that a few minutes ago. Is that
Like
what we were just,
if they're yeah, for timeshare salespeople, if they're coming over to North Carolina to market a timeshare in another area.
yeah, coming to conduct the sale or execute the documents? We don't want other people crossing state borders and taking advantage of our people. We're protecting our people. Okay. All right, it's break time. So let's see, time is 2:12. 2:22 to, what is it, 22, 23. All right, take 10. Right. Back. Something just went weird on my end. Give me a second.
Wait, what's going, oh, here I am.
Is it weird on your end too?
Yeah, originally, but
We just see all of us.
Okay,
Wait.
good. Good. Let's see. That's what I should be seeing right. You should be seeing it now. Do you see my PowerPoint now? Okay. All right. I think it's fixed. We'll just call it a glitch in Zoom. As I said earlier, I do not pretend like I know how this works. I just go with the flow. Okay. Another kind of special property, we're in the specialized property section, manufactured and mobile homes. Now, we're going to talk about the differences. I was going to say one of the biggest things, and we're going to see this more in just a second, but probably one of the biggest challenges, especially with manufactured home, is financing. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think another challenge that we might face is possible zoning issues. So we need to make sure that zoning would allow for a manufactured or mobile home. So first off, let's just break these down and kind of talk about the difference in the two. A manufactured home is built in a factory, and it's built according to HUD standards, Housing for Urban Development. Manufactured homes start off as personal property. If they have wheels, if they have a hitch, they're titled with the DMV. They're regulated and titled by the DMV. Then it is still personal property. All you got to do is hook it up to a truck and away you go. Once you remove the wheels, once you remove the hitch, and once you cancel the title with the DMV, you've turned it into real property. You've permanently attached it, put it on a foundation, remove the wheels, put it on a foundation, cancel the title with the DMV, and remove the hitch. You've converted it from personal property to real property. Usually with manufactured homes, somewhere in the rear, the exterior rear corner, you'll be able to find the HUD label. So if you want to know for sure, is this a manufactured home, you can look for the HUD label. Compare a manufactured home then to a modular home. A modular home is also built in a factory off-site, but it's built in sections. Depending on the size of it, it might be built room by room or floor by floor. And once those sections have been assembled on site, then it becomes real property. This type of building with modular homes is becoming more and more popular. I think there's more control in building in a warehouse or a factory than what you do out in the open. You're more susceptible to weather, for example, out in the open. Here you can build in a factory even when it's raining. There might be better regulations too. not regulations, but better building standards, because you have more control as opposed to workers out on the field. With a modular home, again, it's not regulated by HUD, but again, there is a sticker. So you would be able to find a state inspection sticker, usually in the kitchen cabinets underneath the kitchen sink. So when you open those cabinets under the sink, there should be able to find some kind of state inspection sticker. Anybody have any experience dealing with modular homes? Had one built, family member? I had a friend of a friend that had a modular home built, and they loved it. They bought the land, the 5+ acres, and then they just built their home right there, just kind of bring in section by section. Like I said, a lot of people will say there's more control because it is crafted in a monitored warehouse, monitored factory. A lot of people say, I don't want a home that the wood comes in on the back of a truck. Well, if you go stick built or if you go modular home, all the wood still comes in on the back of a truck, right? It's just a matter of, does it come in board by board or does it come in room by room? I think for commercial too, we're starting to see this more at hotels, for example. Again, you just have better control in the factory settings. What the equipment that's building them is capable of doing. So the big difference in the two, what we're saying, is where they're constructed. The manufactured home is built entirely in a factory, according to HUD standards. The modular home is built in sections, and it meets local and state building codes. So HUD regulates the manufactured, state building codes regulate the modular. There's a couple articles we have for you guys, and now actually once we look at them, I'll put them in the links in the chat. So if you want to grab them and look at them later. One article we found is from a company called Modular Today. And what I like particularly about this article is it kind of gives us bullet point references for modular home versus manufactured home. So modular homes are often factory built, prefabbed homes. They're built in sections in a factory. Again, it might be room by room, floor by floor, depending on the size. So you build a room or a section, you put it on the flatbed of a truck, transport it, and then the developer constructs it on site. Once construction's finished, then it becomes real property. Modular homes follow state building codes. So state building codes regulate construction of single-family stick-built homes. So it follows the same code as what our traditional single-family homes follow. Inspections are required, permanent foundation. Yeah, as far as I can tell, the only difference is it comes in board by board or room by room. Really, that's the distinguishing factor here. Compare it to a manufactured home. So old models may be referred to as mobile homes or trailers. The whole thing is constructed in a factory, so when it rolls off the lot, it comes off complete. And when they start, they have wheels, they have the ability to be towed. Again, you got to get the title through the DMV. Land for manufactured homes can be tricky too. There are parks in some places that will allow manufactured homes. Some covenants may say no manufactured home on the property. A lot of those mobile home parks, the owner might rent the land to put their manufactured home on, so they pay rent on the land, own the home, but rent the land. if they own the land, then they can convert it from personal property to real property, but they would have to own the land. So yeah, I like bullet points. Helps kind of break it down a little bit easier. And then the other thing, just as an FYI, take in consideration with manufactured home financing. There may be run into some issues with financing, not all lenders. This is saying here, any manufactured home built prior to 76, it's not going to qualify for a mortgage home. Anything after 76 has got to meet certain standards and regulations in order to qualify. So if you're working with a buyer that's interested in buying a manufactured home, just make sure that the lender can handle this type of loan. So let's do this. I'll just stop sharing for a second. So there's the first article. If you're interested, you can grab that link. And there's the second one about the loans. Again, you're going to want to do some research, but I think these are pretty good places to get started. Questions or comments on manufactured homes? Okay. Another type, a specialized property. We're going to talk quite a bit about commercial. Different types of commercial real estate brokerage. I think I asked this yesterday. Is anybody, I think a couple of you said you would consider commercial or thinking about commercial. A couple of you. Yeah, okay. This is what I know about commercial. I've always heard this in all my years, that commercial is a totally different beast than residential. So you're going to have to separate the two, right, and know where you're dealing. Some of the differences with commercial and residential. First off, let me say, before I talk about the difference, I got ahead of myself. Unit or chapter 19 in your real estate manual is dedicated to commercial. So if commercial is the avenue you're considering, then make yourself a note to be familiar with chapter 19, because this is your basis. This is the education provided by the Real Estate Commission. So let's talk about what some of these differences are between commercial and residential, what makes them so different. Probably one of the biggest differences is the transaction time frame. I know a lot of new licensees hear some of the commission amounts involved with commercial transactions. There's some nice money out there to be made, but you got to be patient. Residential, we're used to contract to closing, what, 45, 60 days? Commercial contract to closing could be a year or more. So while you are getting more money, you have a longer transaction time frame. There's just more longer time for, property selection, maybe not as many available commercial properties, especially if your buyer is looking for a very specific use or use for a specific property. Probably usually a longer due diligence period, more to inspect, more to investigate. The typical home inspector that we use for our residential properties may or may not be qualified to inspect a commercial property. They're constructed different, different components. Your buyer may want to consider talking to a general contractor for part of their inspection instead of a residential home inspector. Signage, land use restrictions and signage. Zoning applies to commercial, but not just what type of commercial business you can have here, retail, industrial. We'll talk about the different types, but also all the allowable uses, signage, where you can place your sign, visibility. We'll talk a little bit more about this. Is there a certain height that your sign can be, for example? And if you're a business, let's say, for example, you're a retail business, signage is very important. We need your customers to find you. So checking with zoning restrictions, historic districts, making sure that your business, your building, your signage is allowed. Another thing we'll talk about is demographics and market trends. Commercial does tend to study the demographics. They want to make sure before we bring in a retail to this location that the community, the area will support that retail business. So we need to study demographics. Tenant use and types of businesses. Is it retail? Is it office space? Is it industrial? Is it warehouse? There's various needs there for the different office spaces. And then if it's a lease, then it's going to be more detailed than a residential lease. Usually commercial leases are a lot longer than a year. I'm going to say they start at minimum 3 to 5 years. So when you're signing a commercial lease, the minimum you're signing is, I'd say, 3 to 5 years to start. Not uncommon to sign a lease for 8 to 10. So you want to make sure, especially in commercial, that if you're signing a 10-year lease and you plan on growth, does this space allow you to grow? Does this space allow you to continue your business wherever you see yourself in 10 years from now? From my personal experience, one of the biggest differences with commercial and residential is marketing. Residential, we put it in MLS, let MLS feed it to thousands of websites, right? We let the advertising, the listing sell itself. Commercial properties are listed, but typically how we get out is networking, word of mouth, going out, communicating and telling people I have this commercial property. Back in my administrative days, I did some admin work for commercial as well. And I really didn't do a lot, but I guess they needed somebody to process their paperwork and everything. But I got to get in on the breakfast meetings and all that kind of stuff. So that was nice. But that was one thing that I noticed in talking to my residential sales agents and my commercial agents was how they market and promote their property. Again, they use a program called LoopNet. Typically, LoopNet is the commercial MLS, we'll call it. So we do market and advertise commercial properties. I'm not saying we're not, but a big chunk of it is networking and word of mouth. Any experience yet with commercial? Maybe even leasing? Michelle's got some experience. Good. Is the brokerage side?
I actually, in addition to LRB, I actually work for a franchisor. So I help our franchisees work through site selection and the lease process, and actually their build out as well.
Okay, interesting. Is that here in Winston, or do you get to travel, or?
It's here in Winston. We're predominantly throughout the Southeast though.
Okay, all right, nice. And how long you been doing that?
I think this is going on 4 years.
Okay, I was gonna say, wow, if you have to think about it, yeah. Well, good. So you're still, can we ask questions? Are you gonna try to pick up the residential side at LRB, or are you gonna kind of enhance your commercial with LRB? I'm just curious.
I would kind of like to do both.
Okay, good.
I've actually been on the corporate real estate side for about 20 years. So I've done lease administration and a little bit of facilities and things like that.
Okay, good. That's great. Thank you. Anyone else have any kind of commercial experience, even if it's personal? I think a lot of times we come to this class and maybe we've bought or sold a home, maybe we've rented an apartment, but commercial experience is just different.
Do you all consider mixed use properties here as commercial property, or what do you do?
Mixed use would probably have mixed zoning. So you're talking about like residential and commercial in one, for example. They would have,
Retail.
yeah, retail. Because what you're seeing a lot of downtown in Winston right now is like retail on the first floor, and then the second through whatever floor is, apartments or condos for lease, something like that. So that would, mixed use would have a mixed zoning. There's a couple areas. The one that comes to mind, for those of you familiar with Winston, if you go down Stratford Road, go past the mall, keep going, keep going, keep going. There used to be like it used to be Cities on the right. Now I think it's a Mexican restaurant that I haven't tried yet, which I need to. Just past that is a mixed use, what we may call a PUD, planned urban development. And within that mixed use, you have residential, you have commercial, you have medical, right? There's a Sheetz, there's a Food Lion, there's a medical center, there's apartments for rent, condos for sale. And that's one of those kind of mixed use. The idea being you live, work, and play right here. Everything you need could be right here. You could park your car and not leave it for, and not move it again for the next couple months if you didn't want to. So what we're going to do now, there's different variations and choices. So we're going to kind of break down the different types of commercial properties. And the first thing we're going to talk about is office space. So specifically, again, everything we're talking about is in chapter 19, but if you like to follow along, I have the page numbers available here for you. If you're in the digital manual, then you can access it, the chapter 19. Or if you look in the 303 material, then you'll have that chapter in that section as well. So with office space, when we talk about office commercial space, it could be used for clerical work. It could be used for management, professional, similar functions. Office space can be a high rise, lots of floors and a parking deck. That's what we're saying by a high rise. You have multiple levels. It might be that one office rents a whole floor. It could be that you have different offices, different firms or companies, if you will, on the same floor. And a way for everybody to park. Campus or garden building, there's fewer floors, maybe even one level, and surface parking. I think we see this a lot around here. Kind of an office townhome community or an office condo community is what it looks like. Strip centers, office condominiums, again, you got them either stacked or you got them side by side. And then what we're starting to see more and more of are these single family conversions. So maybe a property was built for residence, and through zoning approval, it was later changed to an office building. My firm's office right now, if you look at it from the outside, it looks like a little house. When you go inside, it looks like an office. Maybe once upon a time ago, it was a house. That I don't know. We only have a half bath. So that kind of tells me that it was constructed to look like a house, but act like an office, that's what the intent was. But you drive by it and it just looks like a cute little house. And when it comes to office space, there is different classifications. So class A, we've got class A, class B, and class C office space. Class A office space is defined by a building or structure. It's usually no more than 20 years old. It's modern. It's got today's features and amenities. When I see this, I think technology. It's, Wi-Fi. It's equipped for today's technological world. It's going to be well maintained. And it's just got good materials, good quality. It's the highest, the best, if you will, level of classification. Class B office space is going to be a little bit older, maybe 20 to 30 years old. There's usually some kind of limitation to it. Is it the technology that's limited? Is it location? Is it parking? Is it age of the features? Again, it does not take long for technology to get out of date, does it? And when you don't have the modern technology, then it's hard to operate your business, run your business without investing lots in it. And then there's Class C office space. So this is the older building, and it does seem to suffer from more serious limitations. Possibly some restrictions in the neighborhood. Parking may be a problem. Maintenance on the building. Maybe even maintenance in the parking lot. You want to make sure your customers aren't tripping over cracks in the parking lot or the sidewalk when they come in. Security may be an issue. Improvements, it just doesn't have as modern, as advanced amenities as what Class A and Class B would have. Several things that either the commercial buyer or the commercial tenant need to take in consideration when looking for their commercial space, their office space specifically. The size of the space. Size is important, not just to make sure all your employees have a place to work, you have somewhere for them to work and park their vehicles and everything, but also the configuration of the space. Do you have limitations? I don't know if you guys can see, but this, it looks like these guys have like trees growing out of, you guys see this? Out of the floor. So they're limited because they, they can't put something here because then it's blocked by the tree. And then look, so it might just be the weird configuration like this might actually limit the use of the space. When it comes to, again, we're just focusing on office space specifically. And when it comes to size, there's some terms that we want to be familiar with. When you talk about the floor plate, you're looking at the area of each floor as determined by measuring the exterior wall. So how big is the floor itself? Is the tenant going to occupy that whole floor? Or are we going to divvy it up for several tenants or purchasers? If the floor plate isn't adequate for the tenant's needs or the buyer's needs, then we may need to find another location or possibly even consider 2 different floors. Maybe we do 2 stories, 2 levels. And I've even seen kind of mixed use with that as well. My former firm was in a building in downtown Winston, and the first and the second levels were like individual offices, individual firms. The third level was rented by an entire company. The fourth level was rented by an entire company. So some of those floors we divvied up, and some of them we just had some, like I said, some had the whole floor. So the floor plate is the area of the floor. The core plate then, the core plate is the area used up by, for example, the elevator and the lobby, kind of non-functional space. So the usable area then would be the floor plate minus the core plate, right? If the floor plate is the entire level, then the core plate is the elevators, the lobbies. Then the usable area would be where you could actually, obviously you can't have a desk in an elevator. The core factor is just the percentage of the overall space that occupies the core plate. So of this whole floor, 10% is taken up by elevators, lobbies, stairs, mechanical rooms. Commercial buildings typically have a mechanical room. And bottom line, what the tenant is probably interested in is the rentable area of this whole space. What can I actually use? What can I actually rent? Usually determined per square foot. And of that rentable areas, what's my actual usable area? What can we actually use? Determining square footage of an office space is different than determining square footage of residential. We mentioned earlier residential square footage guidelines, the measuring Bible, but from the Real Estate Commission. That booklet is not going to apply for determining square foot of a commercial and specifically an office building. One method to determine square footage for a commercial building is the BOMA, Building Owners and Managers Association. That tends to be the standard. But keep in mind, it's not the only method for measuring office space. The commission's guidelines, what the commission says on this is use whatever standard you consider appropriate, but you may need to disclose to the buyer or the tenant how you derive to that square footage method. So if you have an interested buyer, help them understand how you got to. Did you use BOMA? Did you use another standard? All the commission requires for commercial is that you use a clearly defined method and specify that so the potential buyer or tenant knows how you came up with that square footage. Again, with office space, still on office space, just some property features and amenities. The floor shape, if it's an unusual shape, not every room is a nice, neat square rectangle, is it? So if it's unusual shape, there may pose challenges. Again, the tenant's trying to make sure that their usable space can be used to fit their office needs. Every once in a while, you might run into like an octagon building or a hexagon building. I would consider that an unusual floor shape. With office space, there's a bay depth. So the bay depth is the distance from the tenant side to a corridor wall. So if they don't have the whole floor, then there's probably a wall, a corridor that or hall that runs down across the building, gets you from the elevator, the lobby to the suite. Floor load is referring to non-structural weight. When building a building, especially commercial building, you have to consider the weight of what's coming in. It's not just the structure that it's got to support, but it's the equipment, the supplies, if it's in warehouse or whatever, can it support all that? this might seem kind of funny, but this always reminds me, do I have any fans? Do you guys remember the TV show How I Met Your Mother? Anybody ever watch that show? Oh, it was such a cute show. You should watch it. And the main character, one of the main character was an architect. And he was called on to develop a building, to design a building. And he started doubting himself and getting concerned. And he was referring to a story that he studied back in architect school. And there was a library built somewhere. You guys remember this? And when they built the library, they didn't account for the weight of the books. So they built the whole library and didn't consider, once you bring all those books in, how much that's going to add to the structural weight. And the building, I don't remember if they said it collapsed or not, but that's what we're talking about, floor load. Just building the building's enough, but can it support the weight of the books? Can it support the weight, especially an industrial warehouse? When you're bringing in such heavy equipment, you want to make sure that the floor load can support the weight of the stuff that the buyer or tenant's going to bring in. Ceiling height. Obviously, we could use ceiling height for vertical space, storage. Elevators. Man, doesn't the speed of the elevator make or break? Have you ever been in a building and the elevator just takes its sweet old precious time? Before you buy or rent, you may want to consider the speed of the elevator, how many elevators, again, the weight capacity of the elevators. And then parking is something else that tenants and buyers commercial need to take in consideration. Is parking on site? Are there adequate number of spaces, not just for their employees, but if they're going to have any members of the public come as well? So a lot to take into consideration. Again, another reason why that transaction time tends to be a lot longer, just making sure everything is adequate for the space. With office space, the rental rates are usually determined per square foot of the rentable area. So if you have a space that's X amount square feet, rent will be calculated on that. And keep in mind that rentable area is different than the usable area. Rentable area very well may include lobbies and elevators, restrooms, break room, etc. Just depending on the type of business. What are the three most important things about real estate? See, you guys are so cute. Location, location, location. You think location is important with commercial and office as well? Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, just some things to consider. Your buyers and tenants need tenants to consider. Will there be public access? Will the public need to access the building? If so, now we're back to parking. Now we're back to space. Is there adequate room for the public to park? Is it convenient and safe for your employees? We certainly never want your employees to feel unsafe coming or going to work. If you plan on having the public access, is it convenient for them? Have you ever tried to find a building and haven't been able to find it because there's too many twists and turns and weird dark alleys? And that may not be the kind of place that you want to invite the public. So if you plan on having the public come, you need to have it accessible. And then any nearby amenities. I mean, hello, lunch, right? You work in a good office place and we start the morning at 9 o'clock in the morning saying, what do y'all want for lunch today? So we start when our day starts. And if we don't have places to run out and grab a quick lunch, then that makes it harder for employees, understanding that they're in that hour time frame. I mean, we've probably all been somewhere for lunch that they can't get you in and out in under an hour, and we don't go back there for lunch, do we? Because we know we just have that limited time. Now, when you're casual lunching, that's a fine place to go, but when you're working on the clock, when you're punching the clock, you got to keep all this in mind. I guess if you were far enough out and couldn't get to lunch, I guess you could have food trucks are the way to go these days. There you go. You could have food trucks come out to your parking lot and serve your people lunch. Landlord, again, with office space, we're going to talk about the different types of lease. We'll get to this next weekend. But right now, most office spaces are going to be a full service lease. Most office spaces will be a full service lease. So the landlord's going to provide utilities, janitorial service, maintenance. Rents tend to be higher, but you don't have to worry about it. Somebody comes in the office and cleans, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for example, grabs the trash. Obviously, some complexes are set up where each unit cleans their own. And particularly with office, upfitting is not uncommon. Upfitting would be the landlord making improvements to prepare it for the tenant. Usually the tenant starts with, let's think of a blank slate. You guys see this before picture here. This is kind of a blank canvas to where whatever tenant moves into this space, they can have it upfitted to meet their needs, meet their desires. So the before and after picture would be the difference. Again, the landlord usually provides X amount for upfitting. I'll come in and do this, this, and this. If the tenant's upfitting requirements go over that, then the tenant will be responsible for paying above and beyond. But the landlord typically starts with an upfitting allowance. And it just depends on the type of business. I mean, I know specifically we're talking about office, which is clearly what we're looking at here. It looks like we took this space and we turned it into a nice conference room or something. But let's say you were a restaurant. You wanted to have a retail space for your restaurant. Upfitting could include, you know, the oven, the hood vents, the counters, the booths, tables, you know, however you want to construct your business. Landlords will typically help in that cost. Keep in mind, it's not maintenance. See, this is another big difference between commercial and residential. The residential landlord has to provide fit and habitable conditions. The commercial landlord does not. So the commercial landlord, pretty much once you rent it and they upfit it, they're done. They're backing off and you're responsible for the maintenance. Of course, it's all going to be spelled out in the lease. So as with anything else, make sure you read that lease before you sign it. Make sure you know what you get yourself into before you sign that office space. But upfitting can be attractive to tenants, maybe that are just getting started. Maybe they don't have a lot of startup money. And so they know that the landlord can help entice them a little bit by providing some of these upfitting amenities to help get that space ready, get them started. Again, talking about office, some common office lease provisions. If you're a tenant, a rent escalation provision may not be uncommon, which means rent can go up, may go down, but let's face it, it's probably going to go up at predetermined times. So you might be that you sign a 10-year lease and the rent escalation provision says every 2 years your rent goes up small percentage, 1%, 5%, whatever. Any of these increases or decreases are going to be agreed upon when we sign the lease. Maybe instead of predetermining the increases or decreases, you can agree to follow, like for example, the government cost of living index. If the cost of living index goes up, rent goes up. If the cost of living index goes down, rent goes down. And also common with lease provision are these pass-through provisions. So the landlord might pass on certain provisions to the tenant, such as taxes, insurance, utilities, operating expenses. They might pass on those expenses, just make it part of the rent or responsibility of the tenant in addition to the rent, whatever the two can agree on. And I think that's what kind of makes this so tricky too, is that anything is negotiable. And the residential world, we're kind of in our own little residential bubble, right? But when you get into commercial, things they can get bigger faster. Comments on office space. Okay. Again, I know we're a little early, but we are at a good stopping place. So let's go ahead before we get into the next section, what you just saw was retail. Let's go ahead and see, it's 3:10 now. So let's come back at 3:20 and we will talk about retail. All right. I'm so jealous. Lauren's outside. I'm just sitting here just waiting to get outside. It's so nice out today. It's hard to be in here today, isn't it? Especially knowing that it's gonna be 90 degrees again, plus again on Wednesday, at least here. So summer's not over. I guess technically summer's not even here yet, is it? Have we officially gotten in? No, not yet. So still left to come, but that's okay. We might get out a few minutes early today so we can have time to go outside and play in the sun. So yeah, if that's okay with you guys, of course. I don't want right before we leave today, of course, we'll talk kind of about what next weekend looks like. Make sure we're all on the same page. But the good news is that after today, you guys are halfway done with this class. So there's one way to look at it. I don't know how you guys feel on your end, but the weekends go by too fast when we teach these all day classes like this. It's like we just started and now all of a sudden we're talking about wrapping up. Time marches on. Any questions about office space? When we come back together next weekend, we're going to kind of talk about, again, the different types of leases that we can enter into, and some various things that apply to any type of commercial property. So right now we're just kind of focused on the specifics. Another type of commercial property is retail space. Retail space is technically defined as any space that's used to offer or sell goods or services to the consumer. Y'all remember when malls were cool? Anybody old enough to remember when malls were cool? Not anymore. It breaks my heart that kids these days won't be able to skip the mall, skip school and go go to the mall. I think my first trip to Winston-Salem ever, I went to high school in Statesville, and we skipped school and came to the Haynes Mall. We thought we were all that and then some. So retail space is just set aside, again, used to offer and sell goods or services to the public. And when it comes to retail space, we can break it down into 3 different classifications. So there's shopping centers. We're going to talk more about shopping centers in just a second, so hang on to that for now. There's standalone retail facilities, so just single-use buildings. It might be a restaurant, it might be like a Belk, for example. And then you have a strip or a cluster. I tend to think of these as shopping centers, not shopping centers, but like a strip mall. You walk outside to get from one store to the other. You don't have an interior. Throughway shopping center for my Winston-Salem people would be considered a strip or a cluster. They're together in one unit, but they're usually independently owned and developed. So to talk about shopping centers, I'm going to reference our manual. We're going to look straight to the manual. If you are on the digital manual, I'm sorry, if you're on the hard manual, I'm looking at page 691. If you're in the digital manual, then we're in the chapter 19 material. So again, one thing I like about the digital, they got the chapters for the post licensing classes. So chapter for the post 303 for this class, and then you have a whole chapter dedicated to commercial real estate property. So in just talking about the different general types of shopping centers, again, why recreate the wheel? Can you guys see that? Your super regional shopping center, it's got 3 or more anchor stores. So your anchor stores are usually your bigger retail stores. So think like Belk, Sears, JCPenney's, when all those were around. They have a large space, usually in excess of 100,000 square feet, excuse me. And they offer more products. I mean, do y'all remember the old Sears stores? You could get clothes, you could get a washing machine, you could get a tractor, and you could get everything in there. They offered more product than most stores, kitchen supplies, bath towels, the list goes on. Regional shopping centers just has 1 or 2 anchor stores. Again, excess space in their gross retail area, their overall retail area. Community shopping centers are usually built around supermarkets, for example. My husband and I joke, whenever you see a Food Lion, most of the time there's a Subway nearby. So if you're looking for Subway, just look for the Food Lion. That would be a regional shopping center. Food Lion is the anchor. Community shopping center. Neighborhood shopping center, again, is built around a grocery store or drugstore. The goods or services are targeted to that particular neighborhood. Again, I think Thruway, isn't there a drugstore in Thruway Shopping Center? Is there? No?
It used to be a Rite Aid, I think.
Used to be a Rite Aid. Okay. All right. I can't keep up with what's there or not anymore. I probably hadn't been to Thruway since pre-COVID. Tell me Dewey's is still there. Is Dewey still in the? That's all I need to know. Thank you. Okay. Probably be the last thing standing around Thruway, won't it? For those of you who don't know, if you ever get to Winston, go to Thruway Shopping Center and go to Dewey's and get you a pink lemonade cake square. That's what you need. Strip centers, again, miscellaneous anchors. They're a little bit smaller. Retail areas under 20,000 square feet. And then the specialty or the theme center, there's usually not an anchor store. I tend to think of like Biltmore, for example, Biltmore Village with these specialty or theme. Biltmore Village looks like, I mean, it looks like a Christmas snow globe. It looks like a Christmas village. It's designed that way. And it creates that atmosphere. Say it again. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, the Biltmore, is that here in North Carolina?
Asheville.
Oh,
Yeah, it's up in our,
a tree fell on somebody's car and died. One of the guys. It was like this, I don't know. It was came across my screen. And I was like, what's Biltmore? I thought it was a shopping store or something.
oh, well, and this just happened.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, Biltmore. I mean, the
Today or
Biltmore's
something.
within Asheville, and there's Biltmore Estates, which is the attraction. So
Yeah.
you can go visit the estates, walk the gardens. You know, Christmas time, they do it up for Christmas time. But outside of Biltmore Estates is Biltmore Village, which, you know, shopping, restaurants, that kind of thing. There's probably a couple hotels down there. So you can make it an event, a trip to Biltmore. You can make it an event. Absolutely. That's crazy that just happened. I mean, you know,
I saw it in the news on my phone. It said it was 3 adults and 1 kid, I think, in a car, and a tree fell on the car and killed one of the adults.
Oh my gosh.
I saw that on our breaker, one of our breaks.
Wow.
I
I hate
was
to
like,
hear that.
kind of
Absolutely hate to hear that.
So yeah, I mean, when you said that, I just immediately, because I was
That's
trying to
just
think,
crazy.
I didn't get to read all of it, and I was like, what is Biltmore? And I just thought it was like a mall or something. I don't know.
I don't think there's a mall. I think it's just the retail, like the strip center. But like I said, it looks like a little Christmas village that, you know, McDonald's doesn't have golden arches in Biltmore. McDonald's looks like it belongs in a snow globe or something in a Christmas village. So that's the attraction. And that's what we mean here. It's creating that atmosphere of a village.
Oh, okay. Did they own like a lot of property or something like the Rockefellers or Carnegie? I think in New Jersey we have like Carnegie or in Of course, Rockefeller, New York,
Vanderbilts.
Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilts, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
That's
you.
what,
All
that's
of
what
those.
Biltmore is. They're
Yep.
like
Yep.
that. Okay.
Yep. Gosh, it's been years since I've been up there.
I want to visit. I hear it's really nice. I've never been to Asheville. Shoot, I've only been in Winston-Salem 3 times. So
Well,
I gotta
keep coming
go
back.
check out this freeway or whatever you're talking.
You know, and it's one of those, like I said, they do it up for Christmas, but I mean, even this time of year, the gardens, you know, are just lovely to walk through and everything. So yeah, go check it out. Renota. What about Renota Village here in Winston? You know, you got the Renota House, and then you go visit Renota Village. I think that would be another place that's trying to create a theme, you know, or an atmospheric area. Various walking paths and stuff that you can wander through, trails, wander along. Questions about just again, a general idea, the different types of shopping centers. And then we also mentioned the standalone and the stripper cluster. So again, this is all in chapter 19 or the commercial real estate brokerage if you're looking in the manual, the digital manual. It's doing weird again. Y'all keep your fingers crossed my laptop will last. This is a good point for me to say something. If for some reason I fall off the call, and I just say that because my laptop's doing weird. So if for some reason I fall off the call, just hang tight. I have learned that if I fall off, you guys will stay put. So I can hop on my mobile hotspot. What do you guys see at this moment?
Your slide. Yeah.
It says 3 classifications.
So you see my screen. Okay, good. At least you're seeing what you're supposed to. And then I just stopped sharing again. Sorry about this. Technical difficulties. Where they say, pay no attention to the man behind the behind the curtain. All right, you guys see each other now? Is that okay? All right. That was really strange. And now you see blue sky, sunlight. Okay. All right. All right. We're making progress. And now we're back to the PowerPoint. And now we all see 3 classifications. Yes. Okay. Really weird. I have my laptop and then I have 2 other monitors, and there for a minute, like right now we look like the Brady Bunch, right? All 9 of us here. And there for a minute, we were on all 3 screens. That's all I had was us times 3. So I don't know what that was about, but it's fixed now. Again, with retail, there's some various factors that affect value and desirability. Once again, with real estate, the 3 most important things are what? Location, location, location. And that absolutely is the case with retail too. With retail, you know, you have consumers coming to you. Unless you're online, then you're not going to have the storefront. I'm not sure the exact location of this McDonald's, but this McDonald's reminds me of, have you guys ever been through Apex, North Carolina? They have zoning on their signage that their signs can't be high up. And I flew home from Raleigh one day and I was driving home, and, you know, I've been in the airport all day and I was probably getting a little hangry. So I said, once I get out of Raleigh, I need to swing by and get me something to eat. And I pulled off at Apex and I was trying to find McDonald's. I know I passed it 2 or 3 times because I was driving around looking up for the golden arches. Well, come to find out, all the signage was down here near the ground. So when it comes to signage, obviously a lot of time that is restricted by zoning. Apex probably has low signs for aesthetic purposes. Maybe they like big open skies, big blue skies, and they don't want the golden arches taken away from their landscape and their visibility. There may be some restriction with signage on how close to the road you can have your sign. They could have restriction of signing on how high up the sign can be. That's all things to take into consideration when you're opening specifically a retail, because like we said, retail, you're in the business to have consumers come to you. So you want to make it accessible, easy to access, not just from major roads, but any source of transportation. So all that taken into consideration, of course, is very important. Some property features and amenities with retail space. You're going to have a bay width and depth. The bay depth and width is the availability of the space. It's usually referring to what's facing the front. What do the consumers see? Do you have your width? You know, again, let's go back to the mall. Do you guys remember Claire's? Their bay width and depth was a lot smaller than maybe, pick something else, Foot Locker. Right? Foot Locker had a wider width. They had a wider depth. The frontage, how much is available to the consumer, customer traffic. Storage area, we need a space for off-shelf product. So you need a place to hold inventory. Some more so than other. And then loading area. What's the ease and the availability for trucks to get in and back in so they can unload this inventory, so they can unload so you can restock your shelves. And it's just, as we speak, all this is changing, isn't it? I mean, the whole retail, the whole idea of inventory and storage and everything, it's changing as we speak. I mean, hello, Amazon. Now we don't even have to go out to the store anymore, and especially post-pandemic. Now we're really not going out to the store anymore. Everything's coming to us, and it's changing the face of retail shops, retail shopping. Retail or tenant mix. When I see this, I tend to think of that old saying, activity breeds activity. Let's go to your favorite retail shopping center. If you go to, again, let's go to Thruway. And if you go to, there's a little kitchen gadget store in Thruway. If you go visit that little kitchen gadget store, what's Thruway Shopping Center wants you to do? They want you to go next door to Rack Room Shoes, and then they want you to go down to Trader Joe's, right? Once you're there, they want you to spend time there. The longer you're there, the more money you're going to spend. So they want to make it an event where you're going to stay. And the idea is if one of the stores can get you in, then that attraction will keep you there and kind of go from store to store to store and spend money. Dewey's for your cake square, and spend money as you go down. So having a mix, having a retail mix and a tenant mix, it gives shoppers the opportunity to buy shoes and kitchen gadgets and anything else you can find along the way. Again, zoning, we talked about signage. Zoning may also dictate allowable uses, setback requirements, all those with residential we have here as well. The exterior construction. Some retail areas, centers may say the exterior construction needs to look like this. Maybe it needs to all be brick. Or in the case of Biltmore Village, it needs to look like a little Christmas town. That would all be about zoning. And in addition to zoning, there may also be covenants. There may be private restrictions. Tenants for retail space need to inquire about utilities. Are utilities already hooked up and ready to go? We just have to turn them on in our name, services on in our name. Or is it the very raw, very basic, and those utilities need to be installed? If they do need to be installed, who's going to pay for that? The tenant or the landlord? And then again, parking. Again, with retail, you're all about trying to get the consumer in. So do you have adequate parking? The back to school rush, the Christmas rush, you know, Black Friday. You're going to have different periods where you have a lot more customers there than, you know, on a Tuesday afternoon. So you accommodate? Some common lease provisions. Again, we'll talk about the different types of leases next week. But just some common lease provisions, percentage rent provisions. Usually the way a percentage rent provision works, there's going to be a base monthly rent. So you're charged X amount per month. That's usually based off of square footage. So how much space are you occupying? And then in addition to the base rent, they may also charge a percentage of sales. Now that percentage of sales may be net sales or gross sales, depending on what we agree to. But the lease may say something like, you know, in addition to base rent, X amount per month, we're going to charge a percentage of sales of any gross sales over 100,000, 400,000, whatever we agree to. So the more money your retail business makes, the more money the landlord, the owner makes. And that money is used to go into, you know, the common areas of the mall, for example. We're back in the mall. We get 2 special visitors, or we used to, I don't know if we do or not, but we used to get 2 special visitors a year at the mall. We used to be able to meet Santa and the Easter Bunny. Well, it costs money for Santa and the Easter Bunny to come out, right? And then you get special events, like maybe, you know, some other celebrity or something. Again, by bringing Santa to the mall, you bring kids. Kids have to come with parents. Parents have pocketbooks. You see the mall's thinking behind this. If we bring Santa, we bring eventually the parents' wallets. Get them in there spending money. So all the retail places contribute to that. Common area maintenance, also known as CAM. Tenant may pay part of the common areas. They may pay a percentage of the common areas, the breezeways, the parking lots, the walkways. If you have food, you need some place to sit down and eat, that would be a common area, the public restrooms. And then some lease provisions for retail may have a tenant exclusivity provision. So an example of this, they may say, we can only have one tenant that serves pizza. So you may have multiple restaurants, but you only have one that serves pizza. They have the exclusive right to serve pizza. If another restaurant wanted to open up and serve pizza, then they would be declined. They wouldn't be allowed to because of this tenant exclusivity. Questions on retail? Another specialty type is industrial. This is the space that's usually designed for manufacturing, storage, distribution of goods. This would be our Amazon warehouse. that are popping up all over the place. The future of retail is here. With industrial, there's several different types, several different classifications. We're going to go through each of these and look at them. For you, they're on page 695. Different classifications. The office warehouse usually is designed for light manufacturing or distribution, and it shares space with offices. So you have maybe the front of the building has office space, the back might be a warehouse. Public generally wouldn't be able to go back into the warehouse unless they're accompanied by an employee. But it's some kind of light manufacturing or distribution combined with office space for the public to access. Bulk warehouse space would be your simplest form of industrial, maybe metal or frame construction, mostly used for storage. You may have some warehouse, or excuse me, some manufacturing, but usually it'd be made for storage. Just a big building for stuff. Another industrial will be large manufacturing, maybe in excess of 2 million square feet. This is going to be near some kind of transportation artery, railroad, highway, interstate, something like that. My Kernersville people, that Ralph Lauren manufacturing place out there on 66, y'all know what I'm talking about? That thing is massive, massive. Really look at it the next time you drive by. They got their own stoplight, for goodness sakes. There wasn't a stoplight there until they opened that manufacturing. That's pretty big to get your own. The aerial view is definitely impressive. If you ever get a Google aerial view, check that out. But the good thing for us in our area is all the jobs that created. We brought that manufacturing in. Small manufacturing is still a manufacturing warehouse, but it's on a smaller scale. Multi-tenant use for industrial. You have several different things going on: manufacturing, distribution, maybe office space, multi-tenant, several different things going on. R&D, research and development. Have anybody down in our research triangle down in Raleigh? I don't think I have anybody in Raleigh on this call. Again, mixed manufacturing. I think one thing that sets R&D apart is it's usually green construction, output. With industrial space, as with other space, we got to take some things into consideration. Square footage and space considerations. Again, it's got to fit the space, fit the need. With commercial, anytime you're measuring square footage of commercial, no matter what it is, office, retail, industrial, there's no standard recognized form for measuring. The only thing the commission says is that you disclose what standard you used, different standards, abbreviation there. A lot of it depends too on if the space is finished or unfinished. And if it's unfinished, how is it planned to be finished? That absolutely can affect the square footage and space considerations. With industrial, as with office and retail, rents are usually based on a percentage of square foot. So they might say, this industrial building is 100,000 square feet, X amount per square feet. Helps you determine rent. And there's always going to be issues with construction. We'll talk a little bit more about those next. Building construction. A lot of times commercial buildings are steel or metal framed, whereas with residential, we're used to wood framed. So just how they're constructed, how they're built is different than what we're accustomed to in residential. So there's construction and building issues. Again, just to kind of mention a few. There's something called a floor load. How much weight can the floor bear? Again, you think about some of these industries, some of this equipment that they're using to build, and it's important that we know how much weight can it hold. We don't want the building to collapse because we overloaded it. How high the ceiling is. A lot of times in industrial, you'll have, I call them little cherry pickers, but you get on a little thing and you hit the button and it lifts you up. You want to make sure you have the ceiling height to get to the top of whatever it is you're trying to construct. A lot of times these are going to be free span constructions, which means we may not have columns. It may just be that the roof is supported by the roof. Columns and piers take up space and they may limit the use. So free span is, just think of it as the wide open space. Kind of gives you more flexibility. If you don't have free span, then you have a place with columns and piers that you got to work around and accommodate your space around that. Loading docks. Again, the ease for trucks to get product to and from. We got to have trucks deliver products to construct, to build, and then upon completion, you need the truck or a truck to come back to take your product wherever you're delivering it. Of course, in industrial warehouse, lighting is a factor. You need adequate lighting for everybody to see. Especially if there's any kind of like detailed work. We want to make sure we have adequate lighting. Utilities, man, I can't imagine the power bill on one of those industry or warehouses. You got all those big bright lights on all the time. You got all those machines running, all that equipment going. Imagine their power bill just. Desirability of space for industry or warehouse. Various property features. What are some of the amenities that make it attractive? Again, it all comes down to the individual preference. What do you want to use this space for? Can we find this space accommodating for our purposes? What's important? Location, location, location. And again, with industry and warehouse, the important thing about location is ease of transferability. Have you ever noticed there seems to be a lot of warehouses and industrial plants near airports? They just need one truck to get it from the warehouse to the airport if necessary, or highway, railroad, boat, however you're going to deliver your product. You want it to be convenient. I think one of the bigger things to consider with an industry and warehouse are environmental concerns. We want to make sure that we're properly disposing of any environmental waste. The landlord or the owner is ultimately going to be responsible. So they will want to make sure, maybe they even have it in the lease somewhere that says that the tenant agrees to be in compliance with environmental concerns, to make sure that everything is properly disposed of. You don't want oils or, grease or anything out. It needs to be handled. It needs to be handled properly. And I think another thing that is more different with industry is business incentives. What is the city or the town going to do to get this industry to come here? The Triad has lost out on several things. For example, we were going to have a Ford manufacturing. We were up for contest for having a Ford manufacturing, but they ended up going somewhere else. I don't remember where they went, but I think some of that may came down to business incentives. What are you going to do for me if I bring my business here? Because you bring a big enough warehouse, now you're creating jobs. That's what Amazon does. Amazon shops around. We didn't get that warehouse in Kernersville at first. That took us a few times, and maybe we had to offer enough incentives to get Amazon to come. But you create jobs, and ultimately that affects the local economy, including the housing market. We want those jobs, so people will have to come in town and buy houses. Questions or comments on industry, warehouses? The last type of specialty property that we're going to talk about is land. Land in commercial world tends to be the most complex type of commercial property, because again, you're starting with a blank slate. You're standing on a hunk of dirt thinking about all the possibilities that this could be. So unless you're like Ralph Lauren out on 66, that you purchase the land to build the warehouse, if you're purchasing a land for commercial, you may not know what that is about. So there's a lot of things to take in consideration with land. One thing with land, the appraisers use this tool, but one thing with land to always consider is the highest and best use. Just because you have a chunk of land doesn't mean that what it produces is its highest and best use. Now, as long as you're within zoning and covenant rules, as long as you're not breaking any laws, you can use that land for whatever you want. But it might be if you use this land for this, it's going to be more profitable than if you use it for something else. And that's what we mean by highest and best use. Not saying what you can and can't do with it, but saying what makes the highest profit. What will get the investor or the owner the highest return or profit. Property, land can only have one highest and best use at a time. But I think it's important that we understand that highest and best use can change. It could have been, I don't know this, but it could have been once upon a time ago before 421 and Salem Parkway, that area that we know as Thruway Shopping Center could have been a field for corn or wheat. And they created the interstate, it created the infrastructure. We now have, Business 40 that turned into 421 or Salem Parkway. And once you put that infrastructure in, now you change the highest and best use. And today I'm presuming it's retail, because you got the consumers, you got ease from the interstate, ease for the consumers to get there. I guess technically, if you wanted to, as long as zoning allows, you could buy Thruway, tear it down and plant corn. I guess technically you could, you own it, you could do what you want, but you wouldn't be maximizing its highest and best use. So that's what we mean by that. Of course, as with anything else, there's land use restrictions, how you can use the land. Again, according to zoning, any kind of covenants, all restrictions apply. Maybe you have to get permits. Maybe you have to get certain permissions or approvals. This may be another reason why there's a lot that goes into constructing before you actually start construction. You got to get that approval before you and I ever see those big bulldozers and that big equipment show up. The developer's probably been working on this land and getting the approval and the permissions for quite some time. They've been working on this long before you and I ever see their equipment. They'll have to get permission from the city, make sure they're in compliance with the city's master plan, their long-term goals. With land, you're dealing with acreage. And any encumbrances. Remember, an encumbrance is just anything that affects titles. And you talk about encumbrances, you need to look at things like easements. Are there any possible encroachments? The physical features of the land. What's the topography of it? How many trees are there? Are they in the way? Do you need to level it? Too many hills? What's your road frontage? How much access do you have in the front of the road? What's the shape of the tract of land? Not all land is a perfect square or rectangle. Some of them are really, you wonder what they were doing when they drew those lines, those property lines. And again, it's important that you know how you can use that land and make sure that you can use it for your intended use. There it is again. Is location just important? No matter what you're doing, residential, commercial, retail, office, it all depends on the use that you want it for though. With land, the site access, what's the public access? Does the public have the right of way? Do we have to create legal access? Where's the driveway? Do trucks go in a different place than the consumer? How we get to it is also very important. Questions on land? Questions on anything? So if we look and learn, test, pass, we got a couple, we're going to look at these briefly, and then we should be about ready to talk about what next week looks like. Couple different lease agreements. Again, I'm in learn, test, pass, the additional forms. So some of the things we're going to talk about, we're getting into property management next week as well. So we'll talk about commercial again, commercial and residential property management. But the couple of different leases that we have, as you can see here, there's one for a single tenant facility and one for a multi-tenant facility. So this would be anything for lease. Maybe it's a 1-unit facility, maybe it's several. I do like to point out, NCAR also provides the commercial forms that we're looking at. All of your commercial forms have this emblem. So on occasion, the residential agent may be concerned or not know that they're using the right form. So if you see this, you need to know that it's a commercial form if you're doing it for residential purpose. The other way that you can identify a commercial form, all commercial forms start with a 500 number. So commercial forms are the 500 series. So if you're residential and only residential, stay away from the 500 series. Also stay away from anything that has this commercial alliance. I think the other caveat about commercial forms that we're provided to use by NCAR, there are many times that these forms don't fit the situation because commercial can be so involved and so complex at times. These simple pre-printed forms may not work. So in the event that you don't have a form that fits a situation, what do you think you're going to do to get the appropriate form? What do you think you're going to do? I see some mouths
The
moving.
lawyer.
Yeah, you're going to have to call your attorney. So thank you. NCAR throws that out. And they're like, look, here's, and this is any form in the commercial series. I've heard this about several forms in the commercial series, that they're just not as complex as the transaction. So remember, the one thing we can't do is whip out our pen and start drafting. And that does include even in commercial transactions. Everybody good with that? So if you get to this, you're probably going to have an attorney on standby anyway, because commercial transactions usually involve an attorney, but they can help you draft the forms. I'm not going to go through both of these word for word, but I do just kind of want to have a conversation about some of the bigger provisions. This is a commercial lease agreement. This is going to be between the landlord and the tenant. So this is a lease agreement. This is the multi-tenant facility that I just happened to pull up. We're going to need to identify the property. What's the property, the premises being leased? Location of it, let's see. As with our residential forms, again, between the tenant and the landlord, there's a place on each page for them to sign. And it's important that we understand that the places are initial, the places for them to initial are not, this is not the legally binding effect of it. All they're doing when they initial each page is certifying that they have read each page. So if we happen to miss an initial at the bottom of the page, it's not going to affect the validity of the contract. Is there an occupancy limitation? Is there a certain number per persons that we're allowed to have in this location? Of course, the term of the lease is important. As we said earlier, most commercial leases are longer than a year. Anything's negotiable, yes, between landlord and tenant. So if you want to sign a 10-year lease, by all means. You do allow, if checked, we can have optional renewing periods. We could allow for automatic renewals if the parties agree. It just depends on the terms, what we're leasing for. Rental of the property, tenant agrees to pay rent starting on this day. If we're checking this box and there's our adjustment every so often, we're going to adjust. We talked about the escalation clause. So maybe we say every 2 years it goes up 3% or whatever we come to agreement with, whatever we agree on. What happens when it's late? When rent is late, there's got to be a fee. And again, all these blanks, these are all negotiable terms. Security deposit. This is going to spell out, same thing with the residential security deposit. This is going to spell out if you break the lease. I guess what I'm trying to say is various ways that you can lose your security deposit. So if you damage the property, unpaid rents, very similar to residential. This is kind of nice. Utility services and contracts. This is pretty clear, I think, about who's responsible for paying for what. And this allows us to go through and say, you know, the landlord's going to pay for sewer septic, the tenant's going to pay electric. Maybe there's not fiber optic, so that would be not applicable. So this way we can almost itemize and make sure there's no questions, no concerns about who's responsible for what. Pest control. And then you have places here for, you know, other things that maybe we don't have on this list that we agree. Any rules and regulations, not only of the landlord, but again, also any kind of covenants, if it's any kind of private restriction or public restriction, what are the various rules? Permitted uses, that very well may come down to zoning. That may be the landlord saying you can only use this building for, you know, this, this, and this. You can't use it for any other allowable uses. Landlord pays taxes. In this particular lease, we know that that's something that might be negotiable. So if the landlord looks at the tenant and says you're paying taxes, and that may be a cue that you need to use another form. This form may not apply because this one clearly says that the landlord's paying taxes, how they're paying taxes, detail on taxes. Insurance, again, somebody owns the building, somebody's going to rent it. So we need to make sure each party are adequately insured. I wonder the difficulty of getting insurance on commercial structures. Michelle, do you know anything about that?
I do have some experience in that area. It's usually, we have our own requirement, and then we will go with whoever has the greater requirement, whether it's us or the landlord.
Okay.
But usually once they take our requirements and what's stated in their lease agreement, their insurance agent's able to match up a policy that meets everyone's criteria.
So they kind of create it to meet what you guys agreed on. Well, that's nice. Because I guess it
is.
depends on the type of commercial that we're, you know, what type are we talking about? I mean, industry would need to insure all that big equipment, you know.
Right, and then also throughout the build out process, usually their insurance is covered by the GC.
Okay. And this may be a silly question, but can we still call Allstate and Progressive and Nationwide, or is there a separate?
You can.
Okay.
You can. I just recently learned though, in the state of Florida, they do not allow you to shop around, or at least that's what we've been told. So
Really?
once you get a quote from someone, that's who you're stuck with.
You're stuck. Wow, that's interesting.
That's what we've been told.
I try to do some research before I get that quote then and make sure, because I mean, I think if you've insurance shop before, sometimes it's shocking the difference of the two policies. That's really interesting.
Yeah, we usually look at somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000
A year
for the premium.
For the premium. Okay. Okay. So yeah, this is just bigger money involved in commercial. I guess I've been doing residential most of my career, so it's just kind of harder for me to wrap my brain around some of those big commercial numbers. Just the size of the building, the insurance, everything, the utilities, I mean, everything.
I was going to say, and that's actually for a relatively small space,
Gosh.
usually anywhere from 1,200 to 1,700 square feet.
Wow. So the bigger you get, the more, and that's part of cost, just the cost of doing business. You got to factor all that in. Very
Absolutely.
interesting. Very interesting. Interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for sharing. Common areas, again, if you have some kind of strip mall or some kind of a office park or something, then you may have a common area. Maybe you have a outside area with some picnic tables and we can go have lunch, parking lot, breezeway, sidewalk, street lighting, all that would fall under your common areas. So we're going to hash it out in the lease about what all's covered there. Let's see, repairs by the landlord. This is, I'm not going to say uncommon in commercial, but it's less common for the landlord to do commercial repairs than it is for the landlord to do residential repairs. Keep in mind, we're talking about two different things here. Residential landlord must provide fit and habitable conditions. Commercial landlord does not. So if they agree to do any repairs, any maintenance to the building, then we're going to have to spell that out in the lease. Mostly repairs are going to be done by the tenant. So they're going to be the ones responsible throughout the term of the lease for maintaining the building or the occupancy. Can alterations be made? Remember, a lot of landlords and commercial will provide for upfitting. So once the building's been upfitted, can the tenant come in later and do anything? Needs to be spelled out. Surrendering the premises. We have to talk about when we're moving in and out. You know, every once in a while you hear about the residential landlord facing bankruptcy or foreclosure. That's probably happened in the commercial landlord too. So what happens to the building? What happens to the space if the commercial landlord faces bankruptcy or foreclosure as well? I'd like to think the tenant is protected. Destruction or damage to the premises. Here's some verbiage about that. This would be where the security deposit would come into play. If the government orders, if they take the area or rezone or re-regulate the area, what happens if the building gets condemned? Maybe we're not so different from residential and commercial after all. With leases, you oftentimes may run into assignments or subletting, somebody else taking over your lease. So again, with commercial, is it allowed? If so, how would that look? How would that work? If either party defaults, any legally binding contract is going to have default and remedies upon default. What would landlord and tenant do if they don't hash it out? Here's exterior signs. I can see where a lot of this may or may not apply, just again, depending on the type of commercial building, where it's located, what you're going to use it for. Quiet enjoyment. All tenants, commercial and residential, have this right of quiet enjoyment, which means they have the right to use the property that they're renting without interference from anyone, including the landlord. So the landlord doesn't have the right just to charge on the property. Lots with commercial and environmental laws. Lots to making sure again that waste and disposal is disposed of properly and not damaging the environment. I think this is one of these things that the landlord would always be held responsible. Even if the tenant did it, the landlord could go after the tenant, but they're going to come after the landlord if they find any environmental concerns, improper disposal. Brokers, if you got agents involved, we're going to list them here. I'm just flipping through real quick. You guys can do this as well. Again, just pointing out some of the highlights, and then everybody signs it at the end. Here's our individual landlord and our individual tenant. So that's the short and sweet of it. I get that, but just a lot to take into consideration. And again, over my years talking to various commercial agents, a lot of the forms that are provided to us aren't necessarily a one size fits all. So if you ever have a situation, I wouldn't be surprised if some commercial companies may even have their own forms, or it may just be that each situation will require us to draft up a new form. Other questions or comments? Anybody change their mind on commercial? We all still status quo on our desire to do or not to do commercial. There's some good money to be had in commercial. You just got to be patient. That's kind of what I'm getting from that. You got to be patient. Well, I think we're at a good stopping place. So hang on, don't go anywhere just yet. We're going to boogie out a little early today. So let's talk about what next weekend looks like. First off, if you haven't, please sign up for the Learn Test Pass for this class. And I suggest you guys spend some time this weekend looking through the various things. I noticed Jane has her PowerPoints in there. I've loaded mine as well, or am loading in the process. I like the quizzes. There's little interactive flashcards. All that is helping you get ready for the exam next Sunday. So one way or another, like it or not, you got to test next Sunday. So take the time this week to, spend time reviewing what we've covered. When we come together on Saturday, I am going to do a little review about what we covered this weekend, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I know there's a lot that's going to happen between 4:30 on Sunday and 9 a.m. Saturday morning. And I get that there's a whole lot. So we will spend just a few minutes reviewing and getting caught up. We'll finish our commercial discussion. We're going to talk about property management. And then we're going to continue things that are specific just to North Carolina. So for example, we're going to talk about joint tenancy and what's unique about joint tenancy in North Carolina. We'll talk about state fair housing, various things like that. We will do a review before your test, right before your exam, to kind of help you hone in on anything. And then Sunday afternoon, we'll take a test, and like half of you are going to be done with post. So you're like rated a week away from dropping that provisional status and putting post licensing behind you. So yay. But don't big celebrate until next week, right? Remember, we still got to get you through next week. So if you guys have any questions this week, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. That's why I'm here. So nothing hurts me more than when you guys show up on test day and say, I never really understood that. I'm making myself available. Please utilize that as a resource. Reach out, let me help. Otherwise, you guys have a great week. Remember, if your license is active, you have a homework assignment to sell a property. So you can come back and tell us all about it on Sunday or Saturday. Okay, so just go sell a house and share it with us. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, go sell some houses too. So I think that's all I have to say. So y'all have a great week. We'll do it again next weekend and we'll wrap it up.
Thanks a lot, Julie.
Thank you. You guys
Okay.
have a good weekend or
Thank
good week.
you. Yeah, you
I don't know
too.
what today